Hello and welcome to this James the Bike Guy, where today we're checking out the totally revised and brand new Trek Dual Sport 2. Now, the Trek Dual Sport is one of the most popular all-road hybrids that are available, and in this video we're going to go into the features and designs of this bike and also talk about why imitation might be the sincerest form of flattery. So if this kind of thing is interesting to you, go ahead, hit subscribe, and check out this video with me together. Talking Trek Dual Sport. Now, the Dual Sport series has been around for quite some time now, and it is what's considered a all-road style hybrid, or effectively a dual sport hybrid as this is named. What a dual sport hybrid is basically a mixture of a fitness hybrid and a mountain bike. Now, by hybrid, what we're talking about is that the bike is designed around doing multiple types of riding rather than one specific one. And most hybrids are set up with skinnier tires, almost like a road bike, but an upright position, more like a mountain bike. Now, this one that's in front of us here is kind of more skewed towards that mountain bike side of things. A bike that's going to be designed to go on some gravel roads, go on some light hiking paths as necessary, but also still be able to run racks and fenders, get yourself to work, or just have a great bike to go around the neighborhood. But the one in front of us here is very different than the outgoing version from last year, and in fact takes away one of the features that was originally a foundational design of a dual sport bike, but I think for good reason, and that is up front here. This fork, as you can see, is a rigid fork, meaning no suspension. But on previous dual sport bikes and other brands that make this type of bike, they generally would have had a 60 or 70 millimeter travel small suspension fork up front. And that suspension fork was designed around smoothing out some of those trails, much like a mountain bike would. However, it had the trade-off of adding some additional weight, some complexity to the front end of the bike, and in some situations, not as efficient as a bike with a rigid fork. Now, most fitness bikes come with a rigid fork up front, but they have that thinner tire. So instead, what Trek has done is they've attached 650 by 50 millimeter wide tires. Now, this is going to be a nice wide tire for a lot of uses. It can also run up to a 650 by 2.0 width tire, which means we've got quite a bit of width in back. So you still got a little extra room to go, but it's going to be narrow enough that it's fast rolling. I should also mention that these tires are a good dual sport tire because the tread pattern on it is going to be smooth through the center, and then the sides are going to have some knobs for some additional grip. So that allows this bike to have a ton of off-road chops by having that extra width on the tire size. But it's also going to mean that because tires get taller as they get wider, so it's a ratio as it gets wider, it also gets taller, it's going to have this nice sidewall to be able to absorb some bumps. That allows them to get rid of running the front fork, allow the tire to do much of the work of the suspension, and smooth out some bumps, vibrations, things like that. And the only real downside to something like that is that on really rough bumps or super deep potholes, it's not going to have the same suspension compliance as what came on the prior generation. Now, in the opening, I had mentioned that imitation is the sincerest form of flattery, and this bike might just have a bit of flattery towards the Specialized Sirrus X. That bike came out a couple of years ago, and it was one of the first to drop the front suspension and go to wider tires. Specialized previously had something called a cross trail, which was very similar to the outgoing Domani, in which it had front suspension, it had those middle width tires, and it was a really good all-around bike. But a couple of years ago, they came out with their Sirrus X and got rid of the cross trail, and it ran a rigid fork just like this dual sport, and it was a really nice performing bike. The marketplace definitely loved it, and I think Trek took notice, and I like to see that because losing some weight and adding some functionality is generally a good thing, but I also like that Trek took a slightly different approach to what that Specialized Sirrus X was. And one of those differentiations is actually around the tires. On the Specialized, it runs 700 by 42 millimeter wide tires, whereas on the Trek, they've opted for the smaller diameter wheel of 650B and a wider tire at 50 millimeters. What that's created is the Specialized has a total outside diameter of 27.8 inches, whereas on the Dual Sport, it's 26.9 inches, allowing the bike to ride about a half-inch lower as the overall diameter of the wheel and tire combination is an inch smaller. The other changes is by reducing to the smaller wheel size, but also running the larger tire. It ends up with a sidewall that's 0.75 inches or about 19 millimeters taller in height. And that should make for a better compliant ride over the 700C wheel format. And they've also made another change because on all Sirrus X's, they ran just a single ring up front, which for most riders, that is fine and it works out perfect because you have one ring up front and then a wide range out back. But for Trek, they're still keeping the double up front. Now, a lot of riders that are using these as fitness bikes or using them to, say, commute on, that is going to be a godsend because by having the double up front, the two rings, and then your wide 9-speed drivetrain out back, you're going to have a super wide gear range so that even when you put a rack on the back with, say, a child seat, with your gear to go to work, your laptop bag, whatever, it's going to have the gearing to do it. But also at the end of the day, when you need a fitness ride and you want a heavy gear to get a real workout in, the bike's going to be able to do that too. And I like that differentiation over the other types of bikes that are out there, along with this adaptation to integrated cables. So you can see here, much like on their fitness bike, the FX that came out, this now has your cable routing going through the head tube of the bike. That means the whole front end is quite a bit cleaner. It also means that it's internal cable routing through the down tube and out to the back. To me, it makes for a much better looking bike. And it's also going to keep things nice and tidy when you're, say, attaching it to a bike rack, putting it on your car to go out to vacation, things like that, because the cables aren't going to be around to get hung up. Now, before we get into the part spec of the bike, I should mention this is a Dual Sport 2. And what a Dual Sport 2 is this is one up in the lineup. And as these go to different models, they're going to come with different parts and configurations. So the Dual Sport 2 is one up. This is kind of the best value-oriented one, at least in my opinion. And it's going to run a gold alpha aluminum frame, all that internal cable routing like we talked about, water bottle mounts on the down tube as well as the seat tube, an aluminum rigid fork up front, and the tires that it's running with are the G0 Comp. These tires are a 650 by 50 millimeter wide, so 650 like a mountain bike, 50 millimeters wide. Of course, you can run up to a 2-inch wide setup. And then out back, that 2x drivetrain we talked about before is rocking through a Altus rear-derailleur. This is a 9-speed Shimano rear-derailleur. It operates a 11 to 36 tooth 9-speed cassette, and then the chain rings up front are matched up with a 4830. That means way lower than a 1-to-1 ratio, but a 4611 is going to help slow the bike down pretty well. Now, speaking of slowing the bike down, are some ProMax hydraulic brakes. These ProMax hydraulic brakes are 2-piston calipers clamping down on 160 millimeter rotors on the front and the rear, and should have good control over whatever load you might be carrying. Speaking of load, this bike does have a total weight capacity of carrying 300 pounds, so it's a good option for somebody that's looking to lose weight or load it up with your kid, gear, whatever you might want. Well, anyways, now that we've taken a look at those features and designs, I'd say it's time to find out what it weighs. And the actual weight of this Trek Dual Sport 2 is going to come in and weigh 29.14 pounds in a size large. Well, thanks so much for joining me to check out this 2023 Trek Dual Sport 2. Go ahead and let me know what your thoughts are on this bike down in the comment section below. While you're at it, be sure to hit the subscribe button and browse the channel to see other videos like this to check out as well.